my mum actually. We had a cup of tea. Fruit cake is so nice. Look how juicy that is. In Australia here, the Lions Club make amazing fruitcake. You buy it and the money, donates to the Lions Club, and they do a lot of really good causes. But also nice to wash down with tea. So anyway, let's start driving. I have a story today for you. Hey, Maddie. I have a story today, a travel story. So I don't hang out much in the chat, unfortunately, because I can't read the chat while I'm driving. So my story is about the people that you meet along the way and how they change you for the good in this case. So when I was living in Mexico, this was 2013. This is travel, right? Because I am traveling technically, though I was kind of based in Mexico at the time. I was in a place called Puerto Venturas, and it was an interesting year that year, 2013. I had broken up with a boyfriend, and a long-time boyfriend, and also lost my job. There's many things going on in my life. So I went back to Mexico to a bit of an experience. I had a job lined up, but in this little place I was living at, Puerto Venturas, I knew my boss, which was Maru. She lived there, and I knew a few people that I was working with, right? When you work in places, you make friends. And my roommate at the time. So when I first got to Mexico, I was put up in some accommodation for about 2 weeks for free. But in that 2 weeks, I had to find out somewhere to live, right? So I had organised an apartment to live, and I had to sign a 6-month contract. So it was, a legal contract that, if I, I had to pay the money, and obviously, and then I had to stay there for 6 months. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do if I didn't stay for the 6 months and went home back to Australia. I have no idea, but I signed a contract. But before I signed the contract, actually no, I just moved into my new place. Actually, this is my first experience living by myself ever. I had been living with my parents when I was younger, and then I moved out with boyfriends. Then I broke up with a boyfriend, moved back home, moved into another boyfriend, and lived there for like nearly 9 years. And that's when 2013 happened, and I ended up getting a share accommodation actually in Australia, and I moved all my things to a share accommodation. And that's when I decided to go to Mexico. And yeah, so I obviously had an accommodation that was by myself. I was trying to find share accommodation, to be honest. I was trying to find share accommodation because it'd be cheaper, right? Like to share a room at someone's house. But that wasn't to go to plan. So I had my own little apartment, beautiful little apartment, 1 bedroom, had Wi-Fi, and I don't think it had cable TV, it just had Wi-Fi and air conditioning. Yeah, and it came with furniture, was great, but I had to buy sheets and things like that. But anyway, that's not the story. The story goes is that I was at a bar having a couple of drinks, as you do, right? You're in Mexico, why not? It's after work. And in Mexico, swing bars are very, very popular. So not swingers bars, just to be clear, not swingers bars, swings bars. Swing. So basically, you swing, on a swing back and forward, but it's hanging from the roof and there's a bar in front of you. So yeah, there was this bar called Mango's Bar, and it was in the middle of the marina where basically where all the restaurants were. Not well. There was a few little restaurants and little, as I said, this place called Puerto was like a expat kind of area, like where there was a lot of Canadians and Americans living. A lot of Mexicans lived there too, but it was kind of like a gated community. So there was just a few little shops, and in the marina they had this swing bar called Mango's Bar. So I used to frequent there quite a bit, and I'd stop in to get a little, cheeky cocktail. So this one night I was there with a couple of friends. I was with my roommate that I was living with originally in the hotel. I had 2 weeks accommodation. So I was sharing the room with a young Mexican lady, and we made friends. So we're at the bar, and I'm with my boss, not my direct boss, Maru, but a new friend I'd made friends with, but she was my boss at the sales deck I was working at, Sylvia, and then her friend Adriana, who also worked with us, so she was my friend too. So anyway, we're sitting at the swing bar, all on little swings, swinging away, having a cocktail, and it's a square bar, and across from me were some Canadian people, Canadian ladies, and they were just having a good old, joyful time. And when you're sitting at a bar, you just have a chat, right? And bit by bit, we're like, oh yeah, you're from Canada. Oh yeah, cool. I'm from Australia. Oh yeah, what are you doing in Australia? What are you doing in Mexico? Um, I'm on a holiday, just a working holiday. Oh, really cool. That's cool. And they're like, oh, well, we're just checking the place out because our friend Lynn here is looking at trying to find somewhere to live here in Playa del Carmen, in Puerto Venturas, to get away from the Canadian winter, which makes sense, right? So, like, I think they call them, bird, spring birds. No, there's a particular word that Canadians use when they flee Canada when it's cold and they go down to Mexico. There's a word for it. I can't think of what it is. Anyway, so they were scoping the place out, but she was with her friends, 3 other friends, and they were having a great time. And I just had a chat, and we exchanged Facebook profiles. That's what you do, right? And when you meet people at bars, you're like, oh yeah, that's my name, Muriara, blah blah blah, and her name was Lynn, and I was like, okay, cool. Anyway, we exchanged Facebook profiles, and snowbirds, that is the word, snowbirds. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I can't actually see who's in the chat. When you do horizontal lives, the chat goes really fast. Snowbirds, that is the word. So Lynn was looking for an apartment to be a snowbird, because to get away from the really, really cold Canadian winter. So anyway, we exchanged details, and she said, well, look, we'll catch up. I'm going to be here for a little while. Let's catch up. So anyway, a couple of days later, she sent me a message and said, hey, me and the girls are going out for some drinks and dinner. Would you like to come? And I was like, yeah, sure. So anyway, we meet up, and we have some dinner, and then we end up at the swing bar, because we always end up at the swing bar. And they'd hired a golf cart. So in the middle of Puerto Venturas is like every expat kind of place for the Canadians and the Americans, the snowbirds, they have a golf course, right? Because most of the people are semi-retired or retired. There is a little bit more money, and a lot of people like to play golf when they're retired. Good way to, be healthy. Let's walk around a field and hit a ball in the sun. So there was a lot of golf carts. I mean, you could drive around this place, but a lot of people had golf carts, and you were allowed to drive the golf carts around inside the, gated community, but just not on the roads, on the actual outside. So anyway, my friends had this like a golf cart. Now keep in mind, we'd all been drinking, right? So none of us were sober, and I thought it'd be really cool to drive it. I mean, look, I'm not saying you should drink drive. That's really stupid to do, right? But I don't know how I can justify that a golf cart isn't driving, because it is driving. Anyway, so I said, can I have a go of driving the golf cart? So, I drove the golf cart. I drove myself home basically. They were on the golf course too, golf cart, and then they dropped me off, and then swapped drivers, and they went home. I don't know why I add that in there because it's the only time I've ever driven a golf cart in my life, and I was drunk. So anyway, there you go. So that was the start of our friendship. And friendships like that last forever, right? And even though this friend that I'm talking about now, Lynn, she's no longer with us. She passed away, I'm going to say about 3 years ago. Miss her madly. Obviously, I only ever saw her in Mexico. So obviously, the moral of the story is that she did actually end up finding a place in Port Aventuras. And I think a lot of the reason that she decided to buy in Port Aventuras was because I was living there, and we became quite pally. So after her friends left, she stayed, and she was still looking for places. Her husband then came down, Mark came down, and they, he played golf. He liked the facilities. Bit by bit, they were looking for a place, and they obviously found a place in Port Aventuras. So it was maybe a couple of months, and then they came back, and we hung out again. And through that whole process, we obviously were back and forth Facebook friends. And, she was an amazing person. She's one of these people that, is so positive about life. But at the same time, she's so realist. She's a realist about life. Like, she had a lot of health ailments. I think she's around 40, she ended up with breast cancer. She fought that and was in remission. And then, unfortunately, maybe about 10 years later, she ended up with a brain tumor, and she fought that, and she was, in and out of remission and treatment. So when I met her, she had cancer at the time, and she was, like, absolutely loved Lynn. She was an amazing person, and I am so grateful for meeting her on this trip, because my time in Mexico would not have been the same without Lynn in that holiday. She also was a life coach in the background. That was her part-time kind of thing that she was doing when she was in Canada. She would do life coaching online. And I know now, looking back at it, she was definitely life coaching me. Like I said, I was living in Mexico. It was, for anyone like trying to live abroad, it's not an easy experience. You've got the culture and the language and work life. It's very, very, it's very hard to balance, right? And to add into that, my last spill in the tea was a story about my. Hold on, guys, I'm just going around the corner here, around a roundabout. My last spill in the tea was a story about how I fell in love in Mexico with a local, as you do. But yeah, watch that one if you're interested. It's the last spill in the tea. And so obviously I was dating a Mexican at the same time as trying to, live in Mexico, work, figure it all out. And that was plagued with obviously lots of interesting moments in my life dating a Mexican guy. And my friend Lynn used to be a little bit of my personal support, I guess. Obviously in Mexico I didn't have a huge lot of friends. I mean, I did actually have a lot of friends, but they didn't live where I lived, right? And even though Port Aventuras is not too far away from Playa Carmen or Cancun, I didn't drive a car because I didn't have a car, and I was working 6 days a week. So with 1 day off a week, I really didn't, go too far afield. I wanted to just kind of stay around and go to the beach in different places where I lived. So, even though I was in Mexico, I didn't catch up with a lot of my friends that I knew from Mexico. because I didn't really have the time. And again, you know, they're also busy with their life. They didn't really come and visit me. A few people I did, like, you know, there's one of my best friends is Anna, and she lives in Cancun, so I would go to Cancun sometimes, maybe every two weeks, and catch up with her. So, you know, my friend Lynn became quite a good personal support to me, because she was living in the area. She was in Port Aventuras, or she wasn't in Port Aventuras. You know, I could text her quite easily on, you know, Facebook and stuff like that, and chat. And I know now, looking back at my time in Mexico, that, you know, she really was life coaching me. I mean, I've never been to a life coach, so I don't really know what it means to be life coached, but I can definitely see that she definitely kept my spirits high in when I was dating this guy. It was not easy dating someone from another culture, and, you know, dealing with the ups and downs of Mexico. Like, things don't make sense. Like, I live in a Western country in Australia, and I'm used to how it is in Australia, right? But in Mexico, everything is so backwards and so different. Everything takes ages to do, and it's an interesting place. And I know fully well that as much as I love Mexico and I'd love to go back and have an experience there, living there, I would never live there long term, like forever. It would only ever be for me would be like a holiday fling kind of thing. Like, you know, it's just a 3 month, 6 month stint. Um, so my friend Lynn, I mean, obviously she's more than me just dumping on her about, you know, issues, my woos in Mexico. We spent a lot of time together going to the beach. So her apartment that they bought, now get this right, so I'm talking about 13 years ago now. 13? Yeah, 13 years ago. It's 2013. They bought an apartment. They bought a 1 bedroom, they call it a condo, 1 bedroom condo. It was furnished actually. It had a bed and everything, and most of the kitchen stuff in there. And it cost them like $160,000 US. And in the scale of life, that didn't seem like that much back then. Now I do the kind of equation, $160,000 US is like 250,000 Australian dollars, which is okay, not bad for a 1 bedroom apartment in a condo at the beach. Had a pool, and you were literally on the beach in the Caribbean. Beautiful beach. So yeah, they did well, and they actually still own that actually, which is really, really great that they've kept it. So my friend, as I said, she passed away, I think 3 years ago now, and her husband decided to keep it because it's a good reminder of, you know, a happy time. All the family get to go there now. You know, like if I wanted to go to Mexico, you know, they wouldn't mind me using the apartment. I'm sure I'd have to pay a little bit of a fee, but, you know, I could use it. I mean, I couldn't go live there for 3 months. That wouldn't be appropriate. But, you know, if I wanted to go to Mexico and had like a couple of days, I'm sure they would let me use it. But I know my friend's husband, Mark, he goes there quite often now to, you know, flee the cold weather in Canada. And, you know, it's a nice reminder for him of a beautiful time. You know, obviously he misses his wife a lot. But, you know, it's nice that his family can remember all the fun times they had there. And, you know, I can't think of Mexico and my time living in Port Aventuras without thinking of Lynn. Like, the amount of times we would go and have drinks at the beach and just go for a swim at the beach, or just to sit on the beach and have a chat. And this over a period of time. I had moved back to Australia in a period of time, and then came back to Mexico to live with a Mexican boyfriend, but I was now living in a different area. I was living in Playa del Carmen, which is kind of like only a half an hour, I guess, minibus ride away. But again, I was working 6 days a week, so again on the 1 day a week, it was hard to catch up with my friend Lynn because Lynn was back living in Fuerteventuras in winter, and I would sometimes catch up with her on my day off, or after work I would go down and catch up. And it was nice. It was kind of like having a friend like in Australia here. Like I'd catch up with my friend Mel. And it's nice to have that. Like I would go meet up with her, and I would bring like a baguette stick or some wine, or I was obsessed with this meal called, it's actually street food called Cocha. Oh my god, Cochinita Pitbull. Cochinita. Oh my god, it's such amazing stuff. Cochinita is basically pork, slow cooked pork in red spices under the ground. So they slow cook it under the ground, and then cook it in this special spice called an achiote, and it's red spice, and it makes the pork pinkish, reddish, and it gives it a bit of a flavour. And I used to buy these sandwiches. They call them tortas, but they're sandwiches, like a best of bread roll, I guess. And they put some meat on it, some pork. They put red onion marinated on it, and then you would put, oh my gosh, like a spicy habanero salsa on top. I would buy a couple of them and bring them to her too to try. She knew I was obsessed with it too, so I'd take a couple for her to try, to eat. And my friend also knew that because I was in Mexico and I missed Easter in my own, like in Australia, obviously Easter's different to Easter in Mexico. And if you're not overly Catholic or overly religious in Mexico, you probably just go through Easter and wouldn't even kind of recognize it, to be honest. And I'm not overly religious, so Easter wasn't a big thing when I was living in Mexico. But one thing I did miss about Easter was hot cross buns. And this is really weird, but I craved hot cross buns. Hot cross buns. When I think of Easter, I think of hot cross buns. And we have really cool hot cross buns here in Australia. And I was saying to Lynn, when in messages, it's like, I miss hot cross buns. So she organised her husband, who was coming down just after Easter, to buy me some fresh hot cross buns in Canada. He brought them down and gave them to me as a gift. And so I got to have hot cross buns. It was nice, really nice. So I can't say enough about how, I don't know, on my channel, if you do watch me, you know that I love my friendships, and I cherish them, to be honest. And some of my friends here on YouTube are very dear friends of mine. And even though I have never met them, it sounds crazy that I have really, really good friendships and relationships from YouTube. If you can take your relationship from YouTube off YouTube and then actually have conversations, it becomes a better a better friendship, right? So like with my friend Marie, if you're watching this, hi Marie. Marie and I have never met each other. We've only done one live together, and we just developed a friendship, and we WhatsApp each other most days, and it's great. As I said, I cherish my friendships. I love my friends, and even though I have never met Marie, it doesn't matter, right? Just like Paul D Australia. Paul and I have been mates for ages on YouTube, and he's like, I'm going to Bali. I'm like, okay, cool, I should come. And I just invited myself to his holiday, and it was great. But taking that off YouTube, your travel friends can be sometimes, like when you travel, it's different. It's completely different. You're more relaxed, right, when you travel. When you're at home in Australia, you're like probably more tense, and like you've got work blues and all the things that you go through. But when you're on holidays, you make friends so much easier because you are relaxed. And I guess meeting someone at a bar is, it's highly probable. I mean, I always have a joke that, I met Lynn at a swing bar, not a swingers bar, but a swing bar. Um, and, she really left an impact on my life, like from her teachings and from her, giving me her experiences and sharing her experiences with me. I'm definitely a better person for it. Like, um, she taught me to trust the universe. I mean, I think I always had a little bit of, a feeling of like, trusting, having faith in the universe. But she really said, really taught me about how sometimes you just have to have faith and just let go of it. Don't overthink things. Don't push things to happen. When you're trying to push things to happen, you're pushing against the universe, right? You're making it happen. There's a difference between making it happen and just letting it happen, right? Um, and that was a big thing for me, because prior to that, I was pushing and pushing and pushing to make things happen in my life. And where she taught me that all you need to do, a little bit like manifestation, is that you just have to put it out to the universe and say thank you for having it. Like, you might not have it right now, but say thank you for it, because then you're actually, putting that into the universe that it's already happened and that you're so grateful for it. So as I said, I don't think if I'd met Lynn, that I would have that feeling and that abundance to be able to manifest. I have, since meeting her, I have manifested so many amazing things in my life, and I'm truly thankful. And, if she was here today, I could tell her how absolutely, thankful, and, thank you for being an amazing friend, right? Um, so before she passed away, we didn't have a talk on the phone. She had her ability to talk after, she got unwell. Was very, she couldn't talk. So basically, she was very, very good at texting. So she basically texted me, and we went back and forth. And I kind of knew that basically this is probably the last time I'm actually going to talk to her, via chat. And she basically said, look after yourself and have a great life. Don't change, be you. And she said, never regret, keep on dancing. She's a massive dancer. She loved to dance, and obviously I like to dance. And yeah, a couple of days later, I got a message from her husband saying that she passed away. Um, but it's just so beautiful that I could have that final little conversation with her before she passed away. And someone that I will treasure her friendship forever. And like I said, my time in Mexico would not have been the same without her. And there's so many people I've met on my travels that have completely changed that trajectory of that trip. Not just Lynn. Lynn has been one situation. Um, I could mention another one, Tanya, an English lady that I met when I was in Vietnam, and we did a bit of traveling together, and we had such fun. And my trip to Vietnam would not have been the same without meeting her. So I know not everyone is going to travel, and not everyone wants to travel, but all I can say is if you do have the opportunity to travel, and if you let yourself meet some people, they could end up being some of your best friends you'll ever have. Anyway, I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to quickly turn this phone off. And that was my spilling the tea. Spilling the tea on how, some of your greatest friends can be made on travels.